Peace, family. This is Muriel with Raw and Uncut. Today's topic was suggested to us by someone that I connected to through the West African drum and dance community out on the West Coast in the Bay Area when I was living out in Oakland. And this person wants me to talk about white supremacy in the African dance community. I was supposed to do this like a couple days ago, and I just had so much resistance. But I'm committed to going over the topics that people ask me to go over, and I'm limiting myself to 30 minutes. So, white supremacy in the African dance community, it's there. I don't know what else to tell you. It is extremely prevalent, and especially among people who who identify as white, and including those who don't identify as white. First of all, let's acknowledge that there's nothing supreme about whiteness. So there's that. But when we talk about white supremacy, what are we actually talking about? We're talking about a group of people with a particular phenotype, believing in the false narrative that they are better than every other human, with different phenotypes, with different skin colors, right? And not only that, that they're smarter, the way that their genetic makeup is set up, that it just sets them up to be successful, right? And this is a narrative that goes back hundreds of years, centuries, that is alive and well today, including in the West African or in the African dance community. And so to me, how it shows up in the African dance community is entitlement. You have people who are not of African descent coming into these spaces, taking up a lot of space without the humility and paying homage to those who are sharing their cultural medicine, and two, to those who are descendants of people who had that cultural medicine beat, raped, and pillaged, kidnapped out of them by potentially the same people who by the ancestors of the same people who are now exploiting the art form, who are of European descent. So white supremacy in the African dance community is very complex, because a lot of so-called white folks don't acknowledge, are unwilling or resistant to acknowledge that they're problematic, versus assuming that they're problematic. I find that I trust white folks more when they recognize, oh yeah, I'm definitely problematic. Definitely call me out. I've done a lot of work, but I know I'm nowhere near the awareness level that I want to be, but particularly the majority of my experience in the African dance community is on the West Coast in the Bay Area. And what I found is, and I'm actually from Virginia. I'm from Southwestern Virginia at that. I'm from the South. And what I found that it is racism and anti-Blackness and how it lives on the West Coast is way more dangerous and way more insidious than it is out here on the East Coast. And I'll explain that. White supremacy, a huge part of white supremacy is anti-Blackness. Now that's true, a huge part of xenophobia, a huge part of, of a lot of the isms is anti-Blackness. The darker your skin, the more problematic you are, the more dangerous you are, the less human you are, regardless of whether you relate as a descendant of Africa or not. So we see this globally, and it all functions as it is a function of anti-Blackness. And on the East Coast, when somebody's racist, they'll pretty much let you know. They're gonna wear their Confederate flag, they're gonna have their Trump sticker, they might say some things that make it very clear, like, I don't like you for what you look like. And for me, it's like, all right, fine. I know I can stay away from you. On the West Coast, y'all pretend like you're an ally, and that you want to learn, and that you Black Lives Matter. Yeah, I'll wear the t-shirt, but y'all don't use shit. Y'all don't do anything. In fact, because you think you're not a problem, you're actually the biggest problem, because you're not conscious of how you're a problem, which makes you that much more dangerous. You're not conscious that you're a problem, but you think you're part of the solution, which makes you that much more dangerous and less trustworthy to me. So in the African dance community, you have a lot of white folks who are consuming the culture, taking it upon themselves to teach West African dance, to teach African dance, to teach the drumming, have been to the continent of Africa once, twice, three times, four times, five times, own multiple drums, but do nothing for the Black community. Zero, save for pay your way to get into the class, pay your $12, $15 to take the class that you're supposed to take, right? It is, and then get in there and have the nerve to have an attitude with people who look like me, who are either dancing or drumming with you, and have an expectation of how to be treated in this space, because these classes are not classes for us. This is our church. This is our medicine. This is how we heal each other, and heal ourselves from all the trauma, right? As well as, this is how we empower ourselves in this space, using our medicine and the power of the movement of our ancestors and the rhythms of our ancestors. Now, I find that a lot of white folks in this community will weaponize the fact that African Americans, African Americans and Africans have a different experience of white supremacy and colonization, right? A lot of African Americans, not everybody, but a good percentage, are either descendants of enslaved Africans or descendants of sharecroppers, at the very least have experienced systemic oppression like Jim Crow, like redlining, all these things that are a function of white supremacy, attempting to, prevent melanated people from actualizing their full potential and power. Because, once we do that, it's a wrap. So in these spaces, African folks who have either immigrated to America or are here on visa to teach have a different relationship and a different perspective to racism. And it often takes a few years to recognize, oh, these people are treating me like shit because of my skin color. And when you're an African man, right, it's a whole nother experience of being exoticized, being fetishized, while also the people around you wanting to consume you, and playing to this, seducing you with this, this attention, right? It's very complex. I'm not going to be able to go over everything in 30 minutes. But then, so a lot of white people in these spaces will weaponize, well, the Africans are sharing their art form and we're paying for it, so it's fine. But then they weaponize it by discounting the experiences of people like me, of Black folks, right, of African Americans, And in an attempt to avoid that higher level of accountability, that, hey, these dynamics don't just aren't erased because you don't want to see them. Now, then you have this other subset of white folks who, want to be an ally. They want to be allies. But I don't trust any of them. I don't trust any of y'all either, even though I'm willing to engage, because I have not seen that there are people doing this from a place of self accountability. Usually, these folks are doing this from a place of attempting to assuage their own guilt and or embodying this sense of white savior, right? So let me save the Africans, let me save the Black folks from A, B, and C, you name it, right? And actually um, without actually dismantling any systems of power that uphold my power and privilege, but oppress these people that I'm supposedly wanting to be an ally to. Now, let's try to bring it back to specifically the African dance community. I have had several situations where I am taking up space with my body in these dance classes, right? Taking up space by learning how to drum and being really good at it naturally, and having to manage getting looks by white women that aren't friendly, that to me I receive as fake, that are like a spiky smile, right? With like snide remarks. This isn't everybody. There are some genuine white ladies who still aren't doing their work, but they're still warm, as far as how we interact with each other. But I've experienced the spikiness, what I'm going to call spikiness. um I've experienced the judgment of like talking about Black women behind their back. I've experienced and seen downright dishonesty, and I've experienced and witnessed just like insidiousness, taking advantage of. All this is alive in the African dance community when we're addressing, so-called white supremacy. But this is not for us as melanated people to think about or even address. A lot of white folks, when they want to come to me to ask me about what I need, I already know that shit's performative and on some white savior shit, because you don't need to know what I need. You need to fix y'all's problem of thinking that you're supreme and that you can just come into a space and take up space and start teaching classes. If you are a group, if you are a group of white women and there's no Black people in your group, and you're performing and you don't see a problem with that, if you're perpetuating this visual, this image that white people are the ones who own and play and share African drum and dance, you are part of the problem. Why are you doing that? Go learn your own lineage art form and your own lineage message. And if you want this art form to be spread, then you need to be giving the resources you're putting into yourself to melanated people, right? I can really highlight some specific situations, and if these people ever watch this video, you'll know that I'm talking about you. But there are people who shall not be named who will literally be like, well, I want to preserve the culture, the traditional style of this African dance, or the traditional style of this African drum is disappearing because the youth are trying to assimilate to European culture and Western culture and whiteness. And so I'm going to invite this African person. Okay, Who did you consult? Because and that's why I say white supremacy is really a function of entitlement. You really think it's okay to be a white savior and preserve somebody else's culture without consulting a council, a large council of melanated people of African descent from different backgrounds, to think, oh, is this the right thing to do? Is this what you all want? Oh, let me tell you what you want. Let me do what I think is good for your community. Does that sound familiar? Does it sound familiar? Because it should. It's not new. So it might be new. It's not new to us who have grown up in the US, right? In settler colonial US, that strategy of white supremacy, whether it's intentional or not, whether it's conscious or unconscious, is not new to us. It might be new to Africans who come to this land and, don't necessarily have that lens yet, right? You talk to Africans who've been here for a decade or more, I guarantee you they're going to have an awareness like, oh, okay, look at, this is what I didn't know. And this is what I wish I would have known. And this is what I know now about how racism functions in the US. I had no idea. So I've said a lot so far. I want to talk to Black folks, specifically to melanated people, to African descended people, because you're my priority and that's where my focus is. So make sure that you are empowering yourself, because generally, this isn't true forever 100%, but generally, white folks are not going to be equipped to be able to empower you or even want to on a subconscious or unconscious level, truly. Like, history and current events and my own personal experience has affirmed that to me over and over and over again. Now, what that means is you need to think about ownership, right? If you want to teach classes, whether it's drum classes, dance classes, both, come up with a strategy, talk to other melanated people about how they manage their classes, how they set it up, how they schedule it, how they keep a bank account. Do they, identify what they do and how they organize it, and, see if you can collaborate with them to teach you so you can be empowered to manage yourself. Because a lot of times, at least for Africans who come over here, they're sponsored by white people, and the white people are the ones who control everything, including the scheduling, the money, the bank accounts, right? And they're not necessarily teaching our people how to do it themselves. They're not necessarily empowering. They're creating a dynamic of dependence. Okay, so whether you're African American or African in the US, prioritize ownership. Okay, we need more people who own drum shops and sell drums of our, people, of our culture. We need more people teaching and or sponsoring African teachers, African drummers and dancers to come here. And we can think about it like, oh, the white folks, they're the ones who have the resources, they're because of, their ancestors exploited, melanated people, all this stuff. Yes, that's true. But we also are selling ourselves short regarding the power and the resources and support that we have within our community. So we have to recognize and stand in our own power. There are so many successful Black-owned dance troupes now. So make sure you're connecting with them. I know a few of them, and they're very, the people, they're generally owned and operated and run, by Black women, which is, traditionally the case for many things. And they're very open to, Sankofa, to share the information, each one teach one, right? So make sure you're putting yourself in the position to have control over your own art form and ownership over your own story, right? Because you have a lot of people coming in to learn West African or learn African drum and dance, but don't know the story behind it, don't even know the purpose of the rhythm or what the dance is conveying. And a lot of times that's intentional. I've had teachers from Africa who will tell me stories that they intentionally don't tell people who are not African descended people. So know that you have a connection, an ancestral, a lineage connection that is a part of your inherent power and a part of your truth and a part of your healing, right? So it is your responsibility to leverage that, as well as leveraging your experience, your awareness of what it means to be in the settler colonial US, in this capitalistic system, to have to make a name for yourself, to market all these kind of logistical things, and be strategic in how we promote ourselves and collaborate with each other and then build within our community. So if people want to access African drum and dance, they got to come to us. They got to come to Africans, African Americans, people of African descent, and pay homage, right? And come with a sense of humility, come correct, and recognize that it is an honor that we are allowing them to access this art form, because we don't actually need their money, because we are supporting ourselves. That's where, they kind of get in and take advantage, one, from folks' ignorance around how to manage money and how to, create a successful and sustainable business, right? And the language barrier, right? So that's exploited on multiple levels. But, once we recognize that we can support each other and we're the gatekeepers of our people's art form, then we can come into what I think is a more correct energetic alignment with how the power dynamics need to be. Right now, you have non-African descended people coming into these spaces, taking up space, getting an attitude, and then coming in and teaching without getting permission from the African teachers to teach, making a profit, making music videos, making songs, and making a name for themselves without giving any resources back to the actual community. And even if they are giving resources, there's like either a savior complex paired with a complaining, right? Oh, they're sucking me dry, or whatever it is. And so we have to take responsibility for ourselves, create our own spaces, create our own tables, and stop trying to join other people's tables. Right? We need to create our own tables to put ourselves in the position of inviting them to our table, not vice versa. Right? And so for the non-African descended people, this includes white folks, this includes Asian folks, this includes Latino folks, because all of y'all have anti-Blackness woven into your cultures as a function of white supremacy and colonialism. So, it is your responsibility to recognize what you need to give. Your humility, you need, without expectation, right? Come to this space recognizing, would you come to a Native American, an Indian powwow and just join the powwow without asking permission? Would you start touching people's hair, touching people's feathers? Maybe you would. I don't know. If you one of those, you still think you would do, that's okay to do that, then you super problematic. Just know that. But if you came to a powwow knowing that the powwow is sacred, would you just go into the circle? Would you just grab a drum and start playing because you think you got the rhythm? Hopefully not. Hopefully you recognize that that is a sacred space. That's true for us when it comes to these classes. Yes, you can pay your way, but come humbly to the floor, because this is not something that belongs to you. And another thing, there are folks who come to that space who have been, like I said earlier, to the continent multiple times, to Africa multiple times. Meanwhile, you have African descended people who have never been to Africa. When I came to California, I never heard West African drums in my life, in real life. The closest I had gotten was watching Coming to America. I had never attended a West African dance class. Meanwhile, you have white folks who are learning West African dance in their high school, starting from, teenage years. And that's that access. So what does it mean for white folks to then be like, you know what? How about we advocate for those funds be allocated to schools with predominantly melanated populations so these children can relearn their medicine that was, again, pillaged, raped, beaten, and murdered out of their lineage. So they can relearn their language and gain, be empowered, right? Without me having to even show my face, without me having to be acknowledged or seen, right? Without saying anything. What does it mean for, instead of taking, as a white person or as a non-Black person, taking that 5th trip to West Africa, instead saying, you know what, let me give what I was going to spend on myself to a descendant of an African who's never been to Africa, and people in their lineage have never been since enslavement, and just give that money to them so they can go. Let me sponsor their trip. Or every time I go, let me give an equal amount to sponsor an African descendant's trip. Or, instead of me bringing somebody from their continent, let me empower people to connect with the children on that continent to recognize that they need to be valuing their ancestral art form, and stop being convinced by white supremacy, the European, Western way of thinking, that their art form is not worthy. Because this is about power dynamics here. So if you truly want to be an ally, what resources are you giving without expecting anything in return? How are you, if you want to go to Africa, how are you telling those children, hey, value your art form so you can come on your own dime, or you can come, on your own to teach us without being dependent on a white person to do it for you, to sponsor you and have that power, right? How can you empower us? And that's the thing that I'm not seeing in the African drum and dance community among people across ethnicities, across races, right? It's very clear to me within the Black community, particularly folks who grew up in settler colonial US, and Africans who've been here for long enough to recognize that racism is real and people don't really give a shit about you. And there's going to be white folks who see this will be like, oh, wow, I don't want you to feel that way. We really do. I don't believe you. I don't believe you. And that's where we're at. And stop trying to convince me. What you need to do is focus on yourself and your own white supremacy and dismantling that, and the racists in your family, and how you're taking up space, and how this is the first time you're thinking about the fact that you wearing African clothes and sharing pictures of yourself is problematic without knowing anything about your own culture and your own lineage. Is problematic. You're consuming. What are you giving? What are you sharing? So that's all I've got. There's so much more I could say. I have so many experiences. I have a friend who is connected to the African dance community. Eventually, we're probably going to write a memoir. They are to recognizing that. Um, and it's understandable. Like, power is not going to want to give up power. Power is not going to want to hold the mirror up. You know, if power recognizes that it's problematic and wants to, you know, be better, it still weaponizes its own guilt in order to be accommodated, right? So, and all this is, I think a lot of it is not intentional, and the majority of it is unconscious, which makes it even more dangerous. That's why I said at the beginning, on the East Coast, at least the racist white folks know they're racist, they're conscious of it, and they're not pretending otherwise. They make it clear. But on the West Coast, people think that they're not problematic, that they're an ally, that they want to learn, and it's a fucking lie. It is a lie. Their truth, their consciousness always, what's in the unconscious always comes out the more you spend time with people. So, you know, at this point, I don't trust people in that community. And you know, it's a matter of, how do you earn my trust? I'm gonna still be nice, I'm gonna still be cordial, I'm gonna still acknowledge you as a human being, but I don't trust you. I don't think you really give a shit about me, you know, and I'm not even focused on you. So I'm focused on melanated people, us empowering ourselves, and reclaiming our birthright. So I'll end the stream there. Peace. Thank you all for listening. For the person who wanted me to speak on that, I hope you got something out of it. And my Cash App is it's $freedom, FREEDOM, Axis, AXIS. That's my Cash App. And peace. I hope y'all have an amazing week.